Good morning again. This is Natali Fani-González, and this is the Economic Development Committee. We're going to have a briefing on the third quarter 2023 Montgomery County Economic Indicators with the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. With that, I'm going to pass it to our staff, Mr. Ali, in case he wants to say a few remarks before we start with this.
No, I think we can just turn it over. We're going to get our regular quarterly indicators report and then a special section on regional comparison, comparing the DC region to other peer regions, and then zooming in on Montgomery County within the region to sort of discern regional versus local effects on the local economy. So I'll pass it over to them.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Tompkins, president of MCEDC. Before we get into the report, and we do have some recommendations at the end, I want to set the stage. A lot of reports have been coming out lately about the state of the economy, and I'm going to refer to three of them very quickly. One is the Washington Area Economy Performance and Outlook, which was produced by George Mason University, and it looks at the region overall. Then I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the Controller's Report on the state of the economy for Maryland. So we're going from the region to Maryland to what we will talk about in terms of the economic indicators here, but also another report, the regional index that came out in January. It's called the Washington Economy Watch. And there's a consistent pattern. So the bottom line is the sky's not falling, but it is pretty cloudy. And it's been that way for a while. Our economy is strong, but it's not growing. We have challenges, but we're not moving forward as quickly as some other parts of the country. I will say, in terms of Montgomery County, there are a couple of specific weaknesses, but as the region goes, so goes Montgomery County, and so goes the state. There are three themes that we'll come back to after we go through the indicators report, and this is not new to you: housing, labor force, and in particular in the state of Maryland, and of course Montgomery County, the labor force as it shrinks is particularly hit by women coming out of the labor force. That's our biggest shortfall. Now while that's a problem, there's an opportunity. And so I don't want to jump into recommendations right now, but think about early care and education and how we get women back into the workforce. So we'll talk about that at the end. And we'll talk about any other issues relative to the other reports and what the other regions are doing. I'd also like to comment on the prior joint session, which does tie into what we're doing, and would like to highlight a couple of points at the end about things that we can do that are consistent with the recommendations from Montgomery Planning relative to the Life Sciences Corridor. With that, I'm going to turn it over. Dave, who's going to start first? All right, Ben.
Okay. So thank you. So for the record, Ben Kraft, research planner at Montgomery Planning, and we'll just be going through our regular quarterly economic indicators report. And as usual, I'm going to start off with the employment part of it. And what we've typically done, so we've been here, I think this is maybe the fourth time we've been here now, and it's actually, the trend is still the same. So I'm not going to go through each data point by point. I think you guys probably have read them and can make sense of them, but I will just re-emphasize as Bill just noted, when it comes to labor force and employment, it's the same challenges that we've had since the pandemic. And actually, what I think these reports show, especially the controller's report, is that these were problems in Maryland, at least, and region-wide since before the pandemic. We've had a declining rate of labor force participation above and beyond a lot of other counties. A lot of that prior to the pandemic was aging. We're an older county, we're an older state relative to others. And also, though, as Bill noted, what's different since the pandemic, especially in Montgomery County, is that most of the there's been a very robust nationwide return to the labor force among prime age workers. That's above where it was prior to the pandemic. Not necessarily in Maryland, though. That's where this the prime age female labor force participation in certain age cohorts is still is one of the major contributors to the slowdown, the continued slow uptick in growth in labor force participation since the pandemic. So it's not so. While all of the above are problems in Montgomery County and Maryland, we're having specific problems with even the prime age workforce, not necessarily just the older workforce dropping out. But as you will see, I think we have actually, that'll be in, I'll get to, you can actually, so I'm not going to go over the occupations are generally the same that we've seen in the last few reports, but I will say if you move to the industry section, we are above our pandemic level total employment. So we've hit that mark and we're above it now, which still slow growth, but the trends and the trend is about the same. But we've now hit that, and we still have I think this relates to what we were talking about previously. Retail, it's been hard to do retail. It's hard to get retail in places that even seemingly have enough population to support it, and we still see this. That we are, this is showing that we're under retailed. We're still below where we were prior to the pandemic, and I probably, I would venture to guess that a lot of this in the retail and leisure and hospitality has to do with this labor force participation problem. So I think that's just a good way to sum up that part, and I think I can now turn it over to Dave for real estate and development.
Okay, we can move through this quickly because things are basically very stable. There was little, hardly any year-over-year change in the office rent or the vacancy rate. The retail vacancy rate was also stable. It increased 0.2%. Gross rent, however, in retail went up by 9%. And multifamily rent, though, increased less than 3%. So that seems to have stabilized to a certain extent. Moving on to home sales, the median sales price continued its upward trend of like it does almost every quarter. It increased by about 6%. And the sold to list price ratio was slightly above 100%, meaning the homes were sold for a little more than they were listed for, 0.7%. Venture capital. Next slide. Fourth quarter venture capital investments in the county were just under $140 million. That was about the same as fourth quarter of last year. It was below 2019 through 2021. The 2021 period especially was obviously fueled by zero interest rates, and then they were very low in 2019 before the pandemic. The Georgia Immune, next slide, it's a developer of cancer and autoimmune immunotherapy. It accounted for 54% of the total. That's not atypical in any given quarter. Biotechnology sector had that and two other deals, so biotech was 62% of the total, since Georgia Immune is classified as biotech. And that is about it for that section. We can now move on to Ben's excellent report comparing the regional and national metro and county growth rates. Very insightful, I thought.
Thanks, Dave. So this is, in one sense, it's yet another comparison or analysis of the growth or, lack thereof of Montgomery County's economy. But, and I know you've seen a lot of those by now, but hopefully this one will provide a slightly different perspective and a little bit more insight on exactly what Montgomery County's, what kind of county we are and what kind of growth and, prosperity really we should expect. And so the approach that this takes is to try to disentangle Montgomery County, the way we think about it, the way it's usually compared to other places. So usually we look at our regional neighbors. A lot of times we look at, just like we were doing earlier today, is looking at counties with, or places with, large life science industries. But what if we strip those away to kind of isolate Montgomery County, and maybe rather than jumping into, based on this kind of qualitative, there's something similar here, there's something in common, what if we just kind of really do it more quantitatively first and say, well, what is Montgomery County just in pure numbers terms closer to? What is it like? And so there's two prongs for which we can do that here. One is to look at Montgomery, or the Washington, D.C. region, the DMV, compared to all of the other large metro regions in the country. So we can say how much of Montgomery County's growth is a function of the DC region overall, because it's very hard, especially as kind of a, we're a kind of core central county, but we're not Washington, D.C. It's very hard to kind of skirt those trends. So if we know what those trends are, that gives us a little bit of perspective for where Montgomery County is. And then secondly, what kind of county is Montgomery compared to, we're not looking at industry specialization, we're not looking at just kind of, any other qualitative thing, but just in pure terms of pure size of the economy. What do we look more like, and what patterns do we have, any growth patterns in common with other counties that are of similar size, and what does that mean? So that's really what this is about. And we really look at three key metrics, very straightforward. Jobs, that's just growth in jobs. Gross regional product, which usually is gross domestic product when you're looking at nations, but this is looking specifically at counties and regions. It's the total value of all the output of the goods and services that are in the economy. And ours tends to be high in this because we're a service-based economy with high value goods and services that we produce. Per capita personal income is simply the average income in a county. It's the total income divided by all the people that are in it. So it's kind of like it allows you to get a feel for what the average person's prosperity and quality of life, what they can purchase with what they make. All the data, it's about a 17 or 18 year span, it's basically looking at what happened in 2004 and then taking the cross-section of what happened by 2021 in the case of the latter two data sets, and for jobs it's 2022. So just kind of looking at that 17, 18 year, almost 2 decade span. And so just to see what we'll be looking at, the main takeaways, I liked Bill's phrase, I think that kind of sums it up. What was it? Cloudy but not snowing, the sky is not falling. I think that's a good way to describe it, because when we look at it this perspective, we can kind of see where Montgomery stands and what are some kind of limitations. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying to grow and trying to improve everybody's quality of life. Of course we should. But when we look at a place like Austin, Texas, we have to recognize that there's certain things going on in a place like that we just because of geography and history and other things like that, we're not going to be able to reach that kind of growth at this point. So along those lines, if we look at the DC region, and we'll show this, it's really performing on par with other major East Coast and Midwestern metros, New York, Philadelphia, Boston. It's kind of along the same lines as those. But all of these East Coast metros are lagging in growth rate the southern and western metros, the Sun Belt metros, Phoenix, Dallas, Houston, Austin. These are the places that are growing very quickly, and part of this is due to there's policy, there's weather, there's a lot of things that influence this, but also there's long economic cycles. And once you get big enough, it's hard to retain that growth rate. The bigger you get, it requires more and more growth to keep that rate up, which is just hard to do. Similarly, Montgomery County is growing on par at a very similar rate in most of the metrics with counties of similar size and similar geographical context, mainly counties that are generally suburban counties of the major East Coast metros. But again, it's lagging behind the counties that are generally home to mid-sized cities that are rapidly growing in the South and West. And this is your Charlottes and your Austins, Denver, these kinds of cities, again, they have more room, they have, in some cases, again, better weather. There's just some factors there that are going to always, and they're the core city. They're the core of their region, which Montgomery County is not, even though it's about the same size economy. The second, or the one other point of emphasis that's kind of divergent from these trends is the per capita personal income. In both the region and Montgomery County especially, even within the region, is really almost flat in per capita personal income growth. That's kind of the most concerning part of this. This report doesn't really get into that, but we do have a research brief and some related blogs that will be coming out soon that will dive more into that. And that's really, and one of the main reasons that finds is that the region, but especially the county, is growing much faster in the low income distribution of the population than it is on the other ends, and in particular the middle income people are really being squeezed out of the county. That group is really almost disappearing. So that's behind that, and we can talk about that, but that's not something that this report specifically is going to get into. And so if we go to the so first looking at the regional, comparing the DC region to all the regions, really so all of the tables are, there's all the metrics, all the tables, all the different ways you can think of growth or lack thereof are in the report. So all I did here was just list a few of them. And so you can see that in jobs, gross regional product, and personal per capita income, the rank in the growth rate, so just like where it ranks out of these 15 in just not the raw number, not the position that it is, just its growth rate, so it's adjusted for size, is in the back half to the back third. DC region ranks last, 15th out of all 15 regions in per capita personal income growth. And then you can see just the change in position. So the DC region still is one of the largest in both jobs and gross regional product. I believe it's in the top 5, maybe top 6 still of this group. Even also in personal per capita income, it still has one of the higher ones. It's just losing ground to some of these other metros that are growing faster in all of these, but again, especially in personal per capita income. If we move, so this chart just is a way to visualize, in this case, just job growth, for presentation purposes, to get an idea of where the DC region stands in growth rate, job growth rate, compared to all these other large, well-known regions. So if you look at the bottom where it's the fastest growth, above 2.5%, and this is annualized, so above 2.5% a year, you've got Dallas, then followed by Houston, Phoenix, Seattle, Atlanta, all these places that are just growing very rapidly. But when you get into the area, it's closer to about, between about 0 and 1% a year. That's where Washington, the DC region is. Minneapolis, even Los Angeles is in that area. Philadelphia, on the other end, Boston and New York. So that's kind of where that's where the DC region is situated, and kind of where what its peers are along with growth. So again, just a piece of context to say, well, if the Montgomery County is growing at 0 to 1% a year, well, the DC region is growing somewhere in that region too, or in that range too. So, it's something that we all, both individually in our jurisdictions and as a region, need to work on. So now we're shifting over to compare counties to each other, or Montgomery County really to all other counties. And so I created this list of peer counties, and really all that is just saying in 2004, ranking all the counties in terms of total employment. And Montgomery County, I believe, was like 41st, I think. So pretty, it's a large county, but it's not, the largest. It's not in the same league as down as Manhattan or, Los Angeles, some of the largest cities. So, the peer counties are just the 15, those that are ranked 15 up to 15 higher, and then 15 lower than Montgomery County. So it's about a range of about almost 400,000 to about 575,000 employees back in 2004. So that's what we're kind of ranking against here. And in that case, once again, Montgomery County is in the back half to the back third, but it does rank last, 31st out of these 31 counties in per capita personal income growth rate. So really, it's kind of on track with the region in those sense. Even though when we do our interregional comparisons, yes, Montgomery County does tend to have slower growth than some of our neighbors. Like you can see Fairfax on this chart, which is just ranking job growth. Same thing that we did with the regions, just looking at it horizontally here to fit all 30 counties, but just job growth over this time period in an annualized rate. And you can get similar information from this chart, where if you take a look at the left side of the chart, the very fast growing counties, there's Kings County and Queens County are the New York borough outliers. That's Brooklyn and Queens. They are kind of an anomaly on the East Coast. There's nothing else like them, and they've been growing very fast. The DC region and Philadelphia, they don't have any counties that are similar to that. Travis County, Texas, that's where Austin is. Wake County, North Carolina, that's the Research Triangle. Raleigh, Mecklenburg, North Carolina. Salt Lake County, Utah. These are all your very fast. Again, they're generally home to the major city of that region is there, but the region itself is smaller than these large metro regions, and these are the core counties of that region. So that is also important, as in that's more of the place that drives the region as opposed to a peripheral like space that we occupy. And then if you go all the way down, you can start seeing Fairfax at about 1%, just under 1%, which isn't that far off from where Montgomery County is. It's about, I think it's like, 0.2, I can't remember the exact number, 0.2%. It's that tiny red nub there. And if you kind of go across, you can see some of these peers that are situated very similarly to Montgomery County. You've got Middlesex County, New Jersey, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and then farther down, you've got Westchester County, New York, Fairfield County, Connecticut, Bergen County, New Jersey. These are all within that kind of like 0.8 to like slightly negative percent per year growth, and that's where Montgomery County is. And then so if you kind of step back and look on the map, and again, this is purely qualitative at this point. This is not, there's using the metrics to kind of make some inferences about what might be going on. And but I do think it's interesting that all of these counties are they're western or northern suburbs of their major cities of either New York, Philadelphia, or DC on the East Coast corridor. They all, you can. To me, I thought this was interesting, and probably I do think is important historically. They all have, most of them have a kind of well-known, what's thought of as like an old money suburb in a sense. We have Chevy Chase. There is the main line in Philadelphia, if you're familiar with that. There is Scarsdale and White Plains in New York, and then Greenwich, Connecticut. There's a lot of similarities where the kind of one of those original suburbs where the wealthy, old money or, whatever, who's working in the main industries tended to live first and build their what in many cases were estates. And then if you really want to get into the kind of the nerdy geography part of this, they're all just to the west of the East Coast fall line, the north and west. So which was very important in the early days of the United States, because it had to do with boat navigation. You can only kind of go up to it. It's where the Piedmont meets the coastal plain, and typically in the East Coast, the wealthier parts of the region would be on the north and west of that for weather reasons and all sorts of other things. So there's just a lot of commonalities. All these places have they're kind of dependent on their main city, but they have large economies of their own right with corporate headquarters. Not all the same industries as Montgomery County, although some similarities. But I think that it's there's nothing set. This doesn't dictate that we need to do anything about it, but it's just good to keep in mind that something like a Westchester County or a Montgomery County, Pennsylvania is a way to think about Montgomery County, as opposed to maybe when we're looking at the counties in the Boston or the Bay Area, which have a lot of different circumstances compared to us, and maybe growing much faster for some other reasons. Finally, you can't really talk about growth or lack thereof in the region without talking about sequestration. I asked around and tried to look. I didn't know. I'm not aware that anyone's done a specific study on if they've tried to isolate the impacts of sequestration. I hear it talked about a lot, and it's clearly, I think, there's reason to believe that the idea of sequestration and across the board federal budget cuts that were enacted just after the Great Recession probably have something to do with the slowdown in the regions and the county's growth. Again, I'm making kind of like a hypothesis here. I think this chart, it has good evidence of that, but I can't directly tie them. But what you can use these charts to see is that really you're looking kind of at not where the lines cross. The blue line is either DC Metro on the left, Montgomery County on the right. The red line is the average of either all the 15 regions or all of the peer counties. And so it's really about the kind of inflection point of where, if you look, it's that if you look at where the blue line especially started getting flat relative to where the red line started increasing. And so really it's that 2010 to 2011 is where you see both of them kind of flatten out, both blue lines. And really since then, the trajectory hasn't caught up. Again, the timeline doesn't match up exactly with when sequestration was it was when it was authorized as a law, and then when there was a little delay as far as I know for when it actually happened. But I think you can make this supposition that something there is related. And again, nothing, just something to keep in mind when we're again talking about conditions and why we might be growing at a rate that we are growing at. So again, to sum up, the sky is cloudy but not falling. We have grown slowly compared to other regions, especially those in the south and west. Sequestration is probably a factor, but not the only one, especially since the region's growth still looks in line with other places that didn't see sequestration or wouldn't have been affected by it as dramatically as we would have. Montgomery County is a suburban county of a major East Coast city. That means something, that we are in the same boat as Fairfield, Connecticut, Bergen and Middlesex, New Jersey, Westchester, New York, just as some examples. And it is going to be hard to compete with certain cities, in the south and west that still have a lot of land and kind of a lot of room to grow and certainly are, have different policy environments. And but then once again, just to emphasize, the personal per capita income growth are lagging almost all places in that. So finally, just getting into, okay, so what does this mean and what can we do? So one thing, I think just the point of this exercise is to just think about where we stand and kind of what the limitations are for Montgomery County and what's possible. Again, doesn't mean we shouldn't be aggressively trying to grow. We certainly should, but just to recognize that there are constraints and and even just to maybe not to kind of come away with this really idea about the sky essentially not falling, and there's some we can look at some decent trends going on. We are, we won't, these are long-term economic cycles, and we can compete where, like what we just said, we've got a very strong life science sector but that a lot of these counties that are more similar to us don't have. And then, as Bill alluded to, control what we can. We've talked, Bill mentioned, it came up in the beginning of this report, labor supply is just an incredibly important limiting factor right now. It's a tricky situation, but it's a good situation in the sense that the jobs are there. The growth is almost in a sense waiting to happen. We don't have the jobs to fill it. If you look at some of the charts and really look at some of the counties, especially the ones that have negative job growth, those tend to be industrial, Midwestern and East Coast cities. That's a different problem. They don't have enough jobs for the people that are there. And so if you're going to pick between the two, having, I think our problem is a better one to solve, or one that's more solvable than that. So, one of the ways to do that, housing, it's, we can't, the places that are growing, these, what I've called younger places, the fact is a lot of them have more land. A lot of the growth, while some of it, they're at a point where they can do infill too, but a lot of it is, single family tract homes because they still have land. We had our period of that. That period is over. We're not going to be able to do that. But if we can offer people a reasonable family-sized homes that are a reasonable price that's competitive with those other types of housing products in other places, perhaps that people will make that trade-off, where there's, we can create good places that have plenty of amenities, plenty of open space. They just may not offer, a full single-family house in a yard. So that's something we really, I think, is an opportunity for our region and others like it to be a leader on. And then what's related to that also is quality of life, because if you're going to do that, what gets people is that, well, it's too crowded and I need to drive places. Well, that's on us to create the kind of place that it does make living in a condo or a townhouse, that can give you a very high quality of life. That's just a way of designing and organizing your infrastructure. And then finally, education. A lot of the things that we are already doing, obviously you can kind of never do enough education, increasing talent, equity, childcare, I think is both quality of life and that issue, and gets into the education and equity issue. So all of those factors, are things that I think when the difference is when you almost have the jobs but not the people, then you have to focus on the things about the people. If you don't have the jobs in the first place, you might be solving, not that we don't want to create jobs, of course we do, but you have a different kind of different priorities that you have to think about. So I think with that, I think Bill might have wanted to.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate on a couple of things, and it goes back to the earlier session. Where you play to your strengths, here's why life sciences is so important beyond what we discussed earlier. Let's remember that this hub, not just Montgomery County, went from number 4 to number 3 in terms of the country, and we can take it to number 2 and number 1 working together. Here's how it hits Montgomery County. The average salary for a typical life science employee in Montgomery County is $150,000 a year. The average salary for your typical employee here is $60,000. So the more people you bring in this industry, you have a multiplier effect. It was asked earlier, what's the return on investment in terms of life sciences? When we were in the middle of our budget appropriation request, which you will see soon, and I hope that the county executive supports it, just took a look at the tax rolls, and with new jobs created just in our pipeline alone, the 4,000 or 5,000 jobs that were created just in our pipeline, added $250 million to the tax rolls. That's just the income tax rate. You take other items that come into account, and it's an investment that is well worth supporting, and that's why we do focus on these particular industries. In terms of marketing, we do believe that we can and should continue to market and market more aggressively, but more specifically. One of the things we did not do in the past was to hone in on markets outside of the DMV, number one. So we are proposing that we do sort of a micro plan for either both Boston and or Silicon Valley, but it's a concentrated effort. It's not just marketing. It's actually more visits to those cities, participating in those communities there to create the equivalent of what I would call mirror environments, that it's like Boston, but it's here. It's a spillover from Boston. It's a spillover from Silicon Valley. And that's where, with quality of life and other things, we have a lot to offer. I think we have to work much harder on working as a region. Now, there are pros and cons to regionalism. It's hard for these three jurisdictions to get together and play in the same sandbox all the time, as you're seeing with discussions about the FBI or National Landing, not National Landing, taking the sports teams from D.C. But if we don't solve some of the regional issues, which include housing, and they're having the same problems, and transportation, WMATA, let's not forget about them, the things that make the region strong, then we're not going to be able to succeed as well as we would like. Let's talk about retention, and in terms of employee retention. I think it's important that we continue to work with the private sector in helping them to retain older employees in particular, to keep people in the workforce, which helps with that workforce shortage. We talked about early care and education, which I hope that this council and government really works hard to distinguish itself in the region for a place where we have that infrastructure And that investment will pay off because you'll bring that many more people back. And it's also something that will be an attractive factor. So please don't forget those things. One thing that MCEDC has historically not focused on, and I go back to Councilmember Glass reminding us to stay in our lane, but as a county, we really do need to work on placemaking. When you think about National Landing, or you think about the Mosaic District in Virginia, we need to do more of what was suggested in the prior session and really make placemaking an important part of what we have to offer, and not forget about the resources we have, whether it be Germantown, whether it be Silver Spring, whether it be Bethesda. So there are lots of things that are within our control that we can work on. And I also want to go back to the school system for a second. I cannot tell you how many times people still come here because we have a good school system, or people perceive that we have a good school system. And I think our school system has been under the microscope for many of the perhaps right reasons, but let's make sure that let's address those particular issues and ensure that the quality of the education here continues to be what it has been in the past and what people believe it to be, because it's easy for us to attract people. Even if housing prices are high, they'll come here for the school system. Think about the difference between paying for a private education and going through public schools and the money that you save. So let's emphasize our focus on enhancing the quality of the experience there, because it pays off huge dividends in terms of economic development for us. We'll stop there and open it up.
You guys have questions? This was great. Thank you so much. And I truly appreciated Planning's comments about the other regions and cities that honestly wasn't thinking about, but it makes total sense. I love the fact that, Mr. Tompkins, you finished with MCPS. It's an economic development issue, making sure that our school system is strong. I mentioned last week in the MCPS session, my trip in Taiwan, the first thing people will say when they knew that I was coming from Montgomery County was, they will relate to knowing somebody, of them being somebody who came to Montgomery County and went through a school system, and we cannot lose that. And plus, the connection between early care, early education, and women. If there's no quality childcare, women cannot go back to the workforce. It's impossible. So I do look forward to our budget for this year to ensure that we extend the access of early childhood education in Montgomery County so more women can go back to work. But as you mentioned again, the key issue of a stagnating per capita income, it deals with education, making sure kids are career ready for those big paying jobs, and making sure that we're attracting folks, as you mentioned, they already have like a high income to begin with. You said $150,000 to work in the life science. That's the average salary. That's huge, and we need more of that coming here. With that, I'm going to pass it to Councilmember Balcombe so she can ask questions and make her remarks.
Great, thank you. So thank you. I just want to piggyback on the early care and education. Just a couple weeks ago, we had the women's legislative briefing at University of Shady Grove, and it was right after the comptroller's report hit. And so it's a really interesting data point about women not returning to the workforce. And several experts on the panel that I moderated talked about that. Again, from the higher end, higher socioeconomic and to lower wage jobs. One is a matter of choice, that they don't necessarily have to return, and on the other end, it's the child care issue. And we have to solve that, because it just, the economic model of child care in the country just doesn't work for low-wage workers, and we're losing out on that. So I think we need to, I agree with our chair that we need to do something big there. And then also the issue of, we always talk about, because of the feds, we always talk about being recession proof. On the flip side, we have this sequestration to deal with. So I thought that was an interesting data point. But I wanted to talk about the peer counties. I think that that's interesting, but I think it's even worse because when you look at those counties, it's the cost of living and the impact of inflation. And I know those numbers don't look at the inflation. So when you look at the buying power of that per capita income, it's really we hear it all the time in terms of just the cost of groceries and the cost of gas, although gas has been pretty good lately, but the cost of groceries and eating out and those types of things. So I think that while I like the idea of looking at peer counties from the perspective of the size of the county, it really doesn't look at the geographic difference in inflation and buying power. So I think that's something that we need to always consider, is that how much do those dollars actually buy in Montgomery County, in the DMV. So.
Councilmember Glass.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just picking up on the astute observations and points of my colleagues, I also want to elevate a report that Maryland Comptroller Brooke Learman released a few months ago now, the Maryland State of the Economy report. And in it, the Comptroller noted that in Maryland, recognizing we're talking outside Montgomery County, but generally in Maryland, there are 3.1 jobs for every job seeker. And this ties back to the fact that we have the jobs, we just need more people living here, which gets back to the housing part. And to Mr. Tompkins' point, staying in lanes is an administrative aspect of the job. But the fact that the previous panel and this panel include both planning and MCEDC means that everyone can be in the lanes, but we can be driving side by side in the same highway. That's the purpose, right? And so I'm glad and I appreciate the chair and staff for organizing this conversation in this way, because we need to be in the same room with different experts working on their different portfolios, but all moving in the same direction. Picking up on a point Councilmember Balcombe made, right? We are in the National Capital Region. We are largely recession-proof when that happens, but when we're not in a recession, we always look to see how we can be economically invigorated. One of the a data point that I'm not sure I have heard, but I think is just relevant to that point, not that we should rest on it, but with regard to the different areas, or even here in Montgomery County more specifically, what percentage of our residents are federal employees? Do we not? Yeah, both of you are ready to hit your light.
I don't know off the top of my head, but if you do, go.
Well, government employees,
Sure.
I think it's about 20%.
Does that include contractors too, or
No, that would be
right? So the ecosystem is even larger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 20%. I'm venturing to guess that's the highest outside of maybe DC.
It's relatively high.
Very high.
So both Montgomery and Prince George's have rates that are very similar.
Very good.
We have obviously the highest in the state because we happen to be next to the nation's capital.
Yeah.
But you also have 18 agencies that are here in Montgomery County.
Absolutely. So again, to Councilmember Balcombe's point, it's another data point that we need to be cognizant of. Clearly, on the flip side, there are 80% that are not federal employees, but lots of people in that ecosystem, and so it is something to be mindful of. But again, it comes down to making sure people can live here, and that is the holistic nature of everything. We get back to it every time we have these conversations. One thing that I had in my notes that I'm not sure if it was addressed. Did you talk about the home sales? Did you
Very briefly, yes.
Yeah, comparatively.
They're still going up. I mean, home sales, in terms of the number of listings, has dropped, but that's happened across the country because of interest rate increases. But the average home price, which is in the report,
Yep.
it continues to go up. And I think the percentage...
And it is in the report. That's I just wanted to circle back on this point, which really hasn't been touched on. It is tax season, and I know that and I can only imagine most of my colleagues have received correspondence from homeowners and taxpayers who are getting their state assessments and wondering why their assessed value has increased so much. The assessed value is a value determined on the property value, and there is a direct correlation between the lack of housing that is available and the economic pressures put on existing housing. And I would venture to say nearly all homeowners, on one hand, are happy that their house value is increasing. They don't like the other aspects of what that entails, but there has been some sticker shock among many residents. And if people are concerned about the ever-increasing value of their property, they need to be mindful that we need to increase the housing supply, which would reduce that increase. It's not something that we publicly talk about a lot. It is sometimes confusing economic data, but another reason why we need to have more housing in Montgomery County, not only so that we can accommodate the workplace demands, but alleviate a little bit the concerns that our homeowners are facing. So just wanted to put that out there. Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think we all agreed. More housing for all. I would say thank you so much for this discussion. There's some points that we're going to take on in March during the office market study between what we heard today in this panel and the previous joint session, and also during the budget with the early childhood education programs that we have and how we're expanding them, in the impact that will have on women on the workforce especially. With that, thank you so much for your time, and we are adjourned.